What if I told you a fifth-round rookie just pulled off a contract move so bold? It's got NFL owners panicking, and agents calling it a threat to the system. Shedeur Sanders may have just rewritten the NFL.
We've got some breaking news out of the NFL where the Browns have signed Shedeur Sanders to his rookie deal. Our NFL insider Jonathan Jones reporting that it's a 4-year, $4.6 million deal. So Cleveland, if you remember, selected Shedeur in the 5th round of this year's draft with the 144th overall pick.
What if I told you that a 5th-round draft pick just completely flipped the NFL on its head? While everyone was focused on first-round quarterbacks getting their massive contracts, Shedeur Sanders quietly walked into Cleveland and dropped a bombshell that his owners, agents, and players across the league scrambling. We're talking about something called prime equity, a contract clause so revolutionary that it could change how every future NFL deal gets negotiated. This isn't just about football anymore, folks. This is about a player who's treating himself like a business empire, and the NFL might never be the same. Listen, when the Browns signed Shedeur Sanders to his rookie deal, a 4-year, $4.6 million contract after selecting him 144th overall. In the 5th round, everyone thought it was just another standard late-round quarterback pickup. But here's where it gets absolutely insane. This wasn't just any contract. This was the first NFL deal to include what insiders are calling prime equity clauses. And trust me, you've never heard anything like this before. You see, while other rookies are just happy to make the team, Shedeur walked into those contract negotiations with a completely different mindset. He wasn't just negotiating as a player, he was negotiating as a brand, as a media mogul in the making, as someone who understands that in 2024, your value goes way beyond what you do between the lines on Sunday.
And more money in his pocket. That's why I said the prime equity is a concept that blends power, brand power, media leverage, and ownership mindset inspired by the legacy of Deion Coach Prime Sanders and carried forward by Shedeur Sanders. It's not a real contract clause yet, but it's a new age negotiating weapon for players like Shedeur who bring more to the table than just football talent. Ain't nobody came up with the word prime equity. A player's total value beyond the field, including their media brand, fan base influence, content rights, merch sales, NIL history, and ability to generate attention, revenue, and culture. It's the prime way of doing business, not just playing the game, but owning the attention, audience, and upside.
So what exactly is prime equity? And why is it sending shockwaves through front offices across the league? Well, buckle up because this is where things get really interesting. Prime equity isn't just some fancy term thrown around by agents. It's a complete reimagining of how NFL contracts work. According to our sources, prime equity represents a player's total value beyond the field, including their media brand, fan base influence, content rights, merch sales, NIL history, and ability to generate attention, revenue, and culture. But here's the kicker. It's not just a concept anymore. It's actually being written into contracts as leverage. Think about it this way. When you turn on First Take, when you scroll through social media, when you see sports highlights, how many times do you see Shedeur Sanders' name pop up? The man generates content, controversy, and conversations without even trying. That's not an accident. That's prime equity in action. And this is where it gets really wild. The source material reveals that this concept is inspired by the legacy of Deion Prime Sanders and carried forward by Shedeur Sanders. We're talking about generational wealth-building strategies that go way beyond traditional football contracts. This isn't just about getting paid to play. This is about getting paid to exist as a cultural force. But here's what's really got NFL executives losing sleep at night. Shedeur isn't just asking for this prime equity recognition, he's demanding it. And based on what we're seeing, he's got the leverage to back it up. Now, you might be thinking, come on, he's a 5th-round pick. What kind of leverage could he possibly have? And that's exactly the kind of old-school thinking that's about to get turned upside down. Because when you look at Shedeur's media presence, his social media following, his ability to generate buzz and revenue streams completely independent of the NFL, you start to realize that maybe the traditional draft position doesn't tell the whole story anymore. Look at his media machine. We're talking about YouTube channels, Instagram live sessions, Twitch streams, direct fan marketing. This guy has built an entire ecosystem around his personal brand. And here's the thing that's really got NFL teams nervous. He can monetize all of this completely independently of whatever happens on the football field. Remember, this is the same player who was making serious NIL money in college. We're talking about brand collaborations, merchandise deals, streaming revenue. All of this happening while he was still in school. Now imagine what happens when that kind of earning power meets NFL level exposure and marketing opportunities.
Legacy, legendary brand collabs, NIL wealth from college, independent monetization power. Quinn Ewers got drafted in the 7th round by the Miami Dolphins. And he ain't getting paid as near as much as he was getting NIL. What if these players come in the league talking about they demand that they get the minimum of their NIL money? Whatever they were making in college, they get the minimum of that coming into the NFL. That'll be a big fight, but that'll be crazy.
And this brings us to probably the most controversial part of this entire story. There's talk in the industry that players like Shedeur might start demanding that their NFL contracts guarantee them at least the minimum of whatever they were making in nil deals during college. Can you imagine the chaos that would create? Our source put it perfectly. What if these players come in the league talking about they demand that they get the minimum of their nil money? Whatever they're making in college, they get the minimum of that coming into the NFL. That'll be a big fight, but that'll be crazy. Think about the implications here. We're potentially looking at a complete restructuring of rookie contracts, especially for players who built substantial earning power in college. And Shedeur Sanders, with his legendary brand collaborations and independent monetization power, is positioned to be the poster child for this revolution. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The streaming and storytelling aspect of Prime Equity means that Shedeur can build his own documentary series, live stream content, and essentially cut out traditional media middlemen. We're talking about a player who doesn't need ESPN or Fox Sports to amplify his brand. He can go directly to his audience and monetize that relationship. The source material reveals something fascinating about this strategy, called Prime Link. Tied to Diane equals audience media culture built in brand infrastructure business acumen. Has a team brand strategy and vision negotiate like an owner. This isn't just about being a good football player. This is about understanding the business of sports at a level that most players never even think about. And the connection to Coach Prime. That's not just family legacy, that's built-in brand. Infrastructure. When you have Deion Sanders as your father, you're not just inheriting football knowledge, you're inheriting decades of media savvy, brand building, and understanding how to leverage celebrity status into long-term wealth. So, when Shedeur walks into contract negotiations, he's not just representing himself as a quarterback, he's representing himself as part of a media empire, as someone who comes with his own audience, his own revenue streams, and his own ability to generate value for the organization that goes way beyond wins and losses. Now, here's where the NFL establishment is really starting to sweat, because if this prime equity concept catches on, if other players start demanding similar contract structures, we could be looking at a fundamental shift in how professional sports contracts work. We're talking about players who no longer need to rely solely on their athletic performance to generate income. But the question everyone's asking is, will the NFL actually agree to these terms? And based on what we're seeing with Shedeur's contract, the answer might be more complicated than you think. Because here's the thing about prime equity that makes it so powerful as a negotiating tool. It's not just about what the player brings to the table. It's about recognizing that in today's media landscape, the right player can generate massive value for an organization even when they're not on the field. Think about it from Cleveland's perspective. They're not just getting a quarterback when they sign Shedeur Sanders. They're getting access to his entire media ecosystem, his fan base, his ability to generate buzz and attention for the franchise. That's valuable stuff, especially for a team that's been struggling to capture national attention. And the mock contract clause that's been floating around, it's absolutely wild. We're talking about viewership bonuses, content ownership rights, merchandising revenue shares. This is treating a football player like an entertainment industry executive. The mock contract includes provisions for a $2 million bonus if Shedeur's official YouTube, Instagram, or Twitch content receives 10 million aggregated views during the regular season. Let me repeat that. We're talking about NFL contracts that include social media performance bonuses. This is unprecedented territory. But here's what's really revolutionary about the content ownership clause. Shedeur would retain exclusive ownership rights to all non-team affiliated behind-the-scenes content filmed during the NFL season. That means documentary series, live streams, vault-style content, all of that stays with him. The NFL doesn't get to control or monetize his personal brand content. And the merchandising revenue share. 20% of all team merchandise sales directly featuring his name, likeness, or approved brand slogans. That's not just getting paid to play. That's getting paid every time a fan buys a jersey, a t-shirt, or any piece of merchandise with his name on it. Now, our source was pretty skeptical about whether teams would actually agree to some of these more extreme provisions, especially the brand equity match clause that would allow the player to co-invest in future team-affiliated media projects. But the fact that these conversations are even happening shows just how much the landscape is changing. The reality is that players like Shedeur Sanders don't need the NFL for that money anymore. They've got independent revenue streams, they've got direct access to their audiences, and they've got the ability to generate income completely outside of traditional football structures. That changes the entire power dynamic in contract negotiations. And this is where the prime equity concept becomes so powerful. It's not just about getting paid more, it's about getting paid differently. It's about recognizing that in 2024, a player's total value includes their media presence, their cultural influence, their ability to generate conversations and content that drives revenue. When Coach Prime responded to questions about the contract by saying, "We don't sign contracts, we build legacies," that wasn't just a cool soundbite. That was a completely different philosophy about how professional athletes should approach their careers. Because here's what's really happening behind the scenes. The NFL is starting to realize that they need players like Shedeur Sanders. More than those players need the NFL. When you can generate millions of views, millions of dollars in revenue, and massive cultural influence completely independently, suddenly the traditional power structure starts to shift. And that's exactly what's happening with this prime equity revolution. Players are no longer just employees. They are becoming business partners, content creators, and media moguls who happen to also play football. But here's where it gets really interesting from a team perspective. Cleveland didn't just sign Shedeur Sanders because they needed a quarterback. They signed him because they recognized that his prime equity value could transform their entire franchise's media presence and cultural relevance. Think about it. When was the last time people were talking about the Browns' quarterback situation with this level of excitement and attention? When was the last time a fifth-round pick generated this much buzz and conversation? That's prime equity in action. And it's exactly the kind of value that modern NFL franchises are starting to recognize they need. The speculation around whether Shedeur will actually end up as the starter adds another layer to this whole story. Our source mentioned that GM Andrew Berry and the coaching staff are taking a competitive approach, potentially giving Dylan Gabriel and others a chance before Shedeur takes over. But here's the thing, even if he's not starting right away, his prime equity value is still generating returns for the organization. Every time his name gets mentioned in the media, every time someone talks about the Browns' quarterback situation, every time a fan buys merchandise or engages with team content partly because of his presence, that's all value that goes beyond traditional quarterback statistics. And this is what makes the prime equity concept so revolutionary. It's not just about rewarding players for touchdowns and wins. It's about recognizing that in our current media landscape, the right player can generate massive value for an organization in ways that have nothing to do with what happens on Sunday afternoons. So what does this mean for the future of NFL contracts? What does this mean for other players who might want to negotiate similar deals? And most importantly, what does this mean for the league as a whole? Well, if this prime equity revolution catches on, we could be looking at a complete transformation of how professional sports contracts work. We're talking about players who are no longer just athletes, they're entertainers, content creators, brand ambassadors, and business partners all rolled into one. But here's what's really going to blow your mind. This is just the beginning. If Shedeur Sanders can successfully negotiate prime equity clauses into his NFL contract, if he can prove that this model works and generates value for both the player and the organization, then every other player with significant media presence and brand power is going to start demanding similar treatment. And that's when things get really interesting. Because suddenly, the NFL isn't just competing with other sports leagues for talent. They're competing with social media platforms, streaming services, and independent content creation opportunities that might be more lucrative than traditional football contracts. The question isn't whether prime equity will change the NFL. The question is how quickly and how dramatically that change will happen. And based on what we're seeing with Shedeur Sanders' groundbreaking contract, that change might be happening a lot faster than anyone expected. This is the future of athlete empowerment, folks. This is what happens when players stop thinking like employees and start thinking like business owners. And Shedeur Sanders, with his prime equity revolution, just might be the player who changes everything. What do you think about this prime equity concept? Are we looking at the future of NFL contracts? Or is this just a clever negotiating tactic that won't catch on? And more importantly, do you think other players should start demanding similar treatment from their teams? Let me know in the comments below. I want to hear what you think about this revolution that's shaking up the entire league. And if you want to stay on top of all the latest NFL contract news, player empowerment stories, and behind the scenes insights that the mainstream media won't tell you, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell, because trust me, the Shedeur Sanders story is just the beginning of some major changes. Coming to professionalsports. Subscribe now for more breaking NFL insider content.